Welcome to the Goddess Keys, where we merge fact and fiction to create our world and to build the life of our dreams and desires. And to do that, we lean into creativity, rest, and flow. Where we find the biggest blockages in our world is usually the blockages around rest, creativity, and flow. So I want you to just think about your biggest issue in your life right now, and if it in any way impacts these areas of rest, creativity, or flow. And if it does, if you have issues in your life where you feel as though you're not able to create, or you're not able to rest, or you're not able to be in flow, that is the architecture which you are dismantling within the simulation. And a great way to dismantle this architecture is through identifying the structure that you don't resonate with, dissolving that structure and creating a structure that does resonate with you. And this is really the body of work that I put together through the Goddess Keys, is to support people on that path. I've just been in a state of fulfillment and, moving into this more of this artistic process, dropping some of the jargon of spirituality has really helped to expand the world that I'm creating. And I kind of never thought I would say that because I wore the archetype of being a spiritualist and whatnot for so long. And I realized at some point that it was actually confining my connection to my innermost self, the architecture of spirituality. And that's what I wanted to discuss in today's topic. This concept of transcending the architecture of the soul. And I know how that sounds because one of the first things that you hear in the spiritual sectors across the board, whether you're a Christian or you're a Muslim or you are New Age, right? It's always this concept of the soul. What happens to our soul once we pass away? This eternal aspect of who we are, right? And who doesn't want that? But one thing I learned in my studies, first in the amount of research and practice I've done around etheric implant removal. For folks who don't know, I am trained in removing etheric implants. Like, actually went to get certified from it. But to be honest, I learned most of my practice was through the work I've done one-on-one with folks, as well as my own particular healing journey. That's one thing that I was noticing that was really kind of scary to me, was when I would do different oracle readings or I would do different divination and all of that. And I share a lot more about how I find information on my Patreon. If this is something you're interested in, like exploring on a deeper level, there's lots of resources on Patreon. But I was starting to see that there was this weird etheric prison energy whenever I would get to the soul or the spirit. And I spent years trying to get out of this construct of soul entrapment. And my research and my spiritual studies kept me in this loop of etheric imprisonment. And I didn't really understand it at the time. And in this podcast episode, I'm going to explain it as best as what I'm about to share. It's come from different revelations, but also different things I've seen in meditation and explored through subliminals and quantum hypnosis. So this is based upon years of findings and study, based upon readings, actual articles or books, meditations, downloads. So a lot of stuff has gotten me to where I'm at right now. And it's this concept around transcending the architecture of a soul, because the soul is itself an architecture. So this won't make sense unless you get this concept. That's a very occult concept, to be honest. I go into this more in the genetic path cutter tier of Patreon. But, first of all, this is for entertainment purposes only. I'm not saying this as a specialist. I'm saying this as an entertainer. One thing you need to know about the simulation is that something changes with a creation once you call it real. Once it becomes fact, it energetically shifts. Okay. And fact is really just an egregore. It's a collective egregore that's been able to generate enough power to go throughout the collective consciousness, reiterating itself again and again until it gains more structure. And it's like the more people believe in that thought form, the stronger it becomes and the more it solidifies into a fact. Okay. But without that collective energy of that thought form, it's a thought, it's an idea. So fact is a form of creation. Okay. Fiction is also a form of creation. What constitutes creation and brings something into material is a dance between fact and fiction, which is moved through art. That's the best way I can describe it right now. Hopefully that makes sense. How does something get created? Somebody gives power to it through art. Once you create something, so if you are an artist, I don't know if there's any artists out there. I know there's artists actually out there that listen to my content. For folks who this resonates with, okay, or for people who have bought or purchased certain types of art. If you commission an art, right? Like if you commission somebody to make a painting for you, or some of y'all have commissioned me to make subliminals, right? If I create a piece of art for somebody and they've commissioned me to create that art, it's my creation, but I'm releasing it to them. So it's something that I birth and that I create with them in mind, and then I give it to them. There's an exchange that happens, okay? But if the world is a whole bunch of artistic creations, the same can be said for words. So words are the creations of people. Language is the creation of people. So we take language as being a fact of life, as being common, as being an agreed upon fact, right? So the sky is blue. That's an agreed upon fact. Okay, the sun is usually portrayed as yellow. That's an agreed upon fact. But, there are nuances to that. The sky isn't always blue. The sun isn't always yellow. So even though certain things have been agreed upon as being normalized or fact, those facts aren't always true. Okay, there's a gray area in things. But the consensus is what creates the fact. And that is done through an egregore. As more and more people get exposed to an idea and consent upon an idea, it becomes more solidified and more materialized. If we take the example of soul, if we look at the etymology of soul, and we see that it actually comes from the Old English version, it appears as soul or sawel, meaning spiritual and emotional part of a person. So that's the life, the spirit, or being of the person. And there's even some evidence that shows in Proto-Indo-European origins that there's an older word linked to soul, which actually means to bind or to tie, possibly suggesting the soul was seen as that which connects a person to life. Okay, so one thing that I was, when I was engaging more in a spiritual journey, I started getting to this concept of etheric imprisonment or soul imprisonment, that in some way, somehow, my soul was not fully mine. Okay. And I kept getting that narrative, and I went at it in a bunch of different healing modalities. But it wasn't until I came to the revelation of life being art that the soul, I started to reimagine the soul and get more clarity on why I was feeling this sense of soul entrapment. So the way things work in the simulation is if you name it, if you create it, if you have your ownership signature on it, and that can be done through naming something or creating something, then that is yours. You have ownership of it. Okay, because that's kind of how art works in a way. It's like once you create something, then you own it. Now, the way that it's been distorted in the simulation is a lot of creatives or artists, in order for them to make it, they need to be sponsored, right? That's a big thing, is sponsorship. Do you have a sponsor to host your event? Do you have a sponsor who's going to help you go on tour or get a record deal or put you in the right place at the right time to meet the right people? Okay. So when you get a sponsor, though, then the sponsor takes ownership of some piece of that art. So that's kind of how this whole art club thing has been running in the background. And of course, this is all just for entertainment purposes only. You get sponsored by somebody, and yeah, they fund you, they give you money, but energetically or etherically, then they also can take ownership over that art. Okay. And we can see how that has played out in many different ways, whether we're looking at the music industry or the visual arts industry, etc., etc. So we see that happen all the time. Now, what does this have to do with soul and the word soul? Well, we need to ask, who created the word soul? How was this word soul created, and what does it mean? Because I just read a part of an etymology of soul that could mean that it means to bind or to tie, or maybe even to be imprisoned. So maybe the architecture of the soul is based upon imprisonment. So even though we might see that soul means life or spirit or being, really, it could mean the creation of a person's or a group of people's concept of life, spirit, or being. And if that's out of resonance with what your innermost self believes life, spirit, or being to be, if you fall under the architecture of the word soul, if you choose to claim that, then you are now under the jurisdiction of whoever created the word soul. I hope this is making sense to somebody. I'm doing the best I can to make this as run-of-the-mill of an explanation as possible with a very abstract concept, okay, that's been designed in a lot of ways to be unreachable or very difficult to understand. So if you identify with the word soul, you are now under the architecture of whoever created the word soul, which means your concept of life or spirit or being now is under their ownership. Okay, this is where we get into things like ownership signatures, because everything is a creation, and depending upon who created it depends upon who owns it. This is where things get really hairy, and this is why I stepped out of spirituality. Once I got to this understanding, once I really interpreted this concept and what it means that, if I follow any kind of spiritual or religious doctrine, then I am under the ownership of whoever created that doctrine. Spirituality itself is a form of architecture. So if I stay within the architecture of spirituality, it limits me, okay? It limits the way I'm able to create art and the way I'm able to perceive art, because now I'm looking at things from the lens of that particular creator of spirituality. That doesn't mean you can't learn from different spiritual texts or grow from different spiritual texts, but my suggestion is to see it all as art. Just like you would, if you were to go to a museum and you were to see a painting that you really, really liked, you are observing that painting, appreciating that painting, but you don't have to create a way of life around that painting in order to get something out of it. Sometimes you can just appreciate it one time and notice something really cool about it and keep it moving. Maybe the painting connects with you in a deep way to where you want to purchase it and bring it into your home, but you still don't create a whole totalitarian environment where just that piece of art is dictating how you see your life. But you see how we do that a lot of times with religion and spirituality. So, if you see religion as art, if you see spirituality as art, you could appreciate many different forms, but you don't get into this totalitarian way of just viewing all aspects of life from that one artistic lens, okay? And that's a lot of times what the architecture of the simulation does. It creates one mass-produced piece of art for a bunch of people to perceive it in the same way. And this is what keeps people predictable. This is what keeps people in their scripts and in their loops. So this is why I would suggest reimagining what the soul is. You might, because the first piece of pushback that I might get with this topic is this concept of, well, does that mean you're atheist? Like, if you don't believe in a soul, like, is there any grand design? And I would say no. Like, this is us having to transcend the binary thinking. Okay, just because I don't see or I don't identify with the concept of a soul, that doesn't mean that I don't have a particular concept or architecture or creation that I'm building around who I am outside of any label that the simulation can give me. If I keep my essence unnameable, if I keep my emanation unnameable, unspeakable, then it is sacred. It's something that cannot be defined by any outside force. So I ask you, why would you take such a personal concept like the soul tries to express? And why would you let somebody else name that for you? Your most sacred aspects of self has no language, because language itself is a piece of architecture. It was a creation. And you want to transcend all forms of architecture created by the simulation in order to spiral out of it. That's the best way I can describe it, y'all. If you are interested in diving deeper, then you can connect with me on a one-on-one quest, or also join me on Black Diamond on Patreon. Black Diamond is for folks who would like some kind of support or touch point on a monthly basis, but maybe aren't ready to take a quest yet. But that's a really great way to kind of learn more about some of these abstract concepts that I'm sharing on social media. But, if you have more specific questions about how this might be playing out in your world, then you can join me over on Black Diamond and have a more immersive experience with this content. And also thank you for the folks who have been supporting with the Beyond the Birth Chart readings. If you're looking to do a major avatar shift and to transcend a lot of the coding in the simulation, Beyond the Birth Chart might just be a good fit for you. These readings are now coming with a copy of my book, Beyond the Birth Chart, as well as a very in-depth reading and deep dive look at deprogramming your birth chart and the grids that it might be associated with. So if that perks your interest, I'll put some links down below for you to peruse. Sending you lots of love, joy, and peace until we meet again.